Hey there everyone and welcome back to the React.js training. Now, in case you're wondering, did I did something behind your back? Yes, actually I did a little bit of the things. Let me show you what I actually did. So I'll just open up the React exercise folder and I have created a new folder inside it, project-2, and I have actually created a component basic kind of a hello world app in here. So I'll show you how I did that. It's actually very easy how I did that. I created a folder using this command mkdir project2. You can do that graphically as well. Then you have to go inside the project2, then run this command create-react-app. And since we have already installed this command using npm in one of the local environment video, we don't need to do this again and again. Now this command is installed on your system. So create-react-app, and then instead of hello world, I have named it component-basics. So basically you can name it anything. Then I went into the component basics and I have started the npm-start to start the deployment server or development server in this case. Okay, sounds good. And everything is running on localhost 3000, and basically I can actually close all of these things. We don't need you as of now. We will need you in the next video, but right now it's just completely okay. Now open this folder into your code editor. In this case it's Atom component basics, and I have rearranged my screen a little bit so that we can see everything side by side. Okay, that sounds good. Now what we want to do is learn more about the components in this movie, since you'll be hearing a lot of people talking about, whenever they talk about the React, they will be talking about components, states, and prop. So in this section we want to cover up components as much as possible, because later on we'll talk about state and props. Okay, one thing at a time. So what I want you to do is just select this div, and whatever is there inside this div, just get rid of this, save that. Now this gives us a clean slate to work around there. Okay, sounds good. Now let's talk about the rules and things. Now the very first thing, the rule is this guy, this component guy, can only return one element. Now it can be whatever element. It can be just an h2. It can be a div, and inside the div there can be dozens of elements, but it can return just one thing. So in case you are wondering that, hey, I want to go something like div, and I will just have two divs there, and that's it. Save this and call a problem there. So there we go. Now in case you want to return multiple things, you can have multiple divs inside the divs, and then it's not gonna yell at you. Then it's completely fine for it, but you just can return one thing. Now second thing that you might have not been aware, this is not an actual HTML. We are working with the JSX. Now obviously it doesn't look like a JSX, but basically it's a new syntax in here. Now you could also work with methods like .createElement or create HTML element and pass on the things using objects, but that's actually a painful way. This looks much more cool because you can just directly copy and paste things from HTML and voila, it works, and it's much more familiar syntax. And that's all the thing you need to worry about, the JSX syntax. Obviously I'll be telling you a couple of more syntax, but first of all let's create an h2 tag and have some boilerplate code in here, and I'll say just some sample data. Okay, sounds good. So we have got some sample data in here. Now how we can do the things in here? So what we'll be doing is, first of all, let's go just after the render. I'll create a constant there and I'll call this as name, or let's just call this as my name. That sounds good. And I'll call this as Sammy. Okay. Now if you want to access any constant or variable or anything in here, what we can do is we can use a pair of parentheses and then call my name. And no big deal, it just shows us the Sammy. Okay, so far so good. Nothing extraordinary that we are dealing in here. Okay, sounds good. Now what we can do, obviously you might have noticed that since this is processing the things, it can process other things. Like obviously if you'll do a 5 plus 5, but I don't know who would do that, it will return us or throw us a 10 there, but that's okay. Now obviously since it can do these things, it can also do things like, for example, if I'll go inside the class, make sure I'm inside the class, not in the render method, I can create more functions in here. For example, if I just say something like say hello there, and I create a method there that takes name as well, and it just return something like hello and says the name in there. just like that. So this is a simple method that returns hello plus the name, and I want to execute this method in here, and you might be expecting, hey, it's just say hello and put a parenthesis, and inside that I'm going to pass on a name. So for example, Sammy there. Save that, and notice it's saying and it's yelling us a lot of things. Now all we are worried about the errors, not at all worried about the warning in here at this time. So it's saying, hey, say hello is not defined, but say hello is actually defined. So what's wrong in here? Now to access these things inside the class, you have to say this dot say hello. Now as soon as I save this, now this says hello Sammy. So this is good so far. So whenever you want to access methods from the class, it's actually the way all of the things are usually bind with this. Now obviously later on we'll learn how we can bind the methods using a .bind method, but right now it would be too much of the complications in here. So that's one thing. Now let's talk about one more thing, since we are talking about the components and basically it's just a class, is something known as constructors. And the best way to go around with a constructor is to simply type RCON, and that gives you a constructor, and hit the tab key. Now why it gives you the constructor just like this? Because again, Atom in the snippets, I have defined the basic kind of constructor in here, and this is what it gives you. Now since it gives you all the basic elements, this is always required. In the constructor we usually pass the props there, and you have to call the parent method of the properties in here. Now in the constructor, basically it's usually used to define the state. Right now we have no idea what the state is, what the props is, but basically this is how the constructor looks like. And the constructor, obviously you can define things like, again, let's just say this dot, let's just, in this case, let's just say your name, and then we can simply say, let's just say Amy is gonna be the name, and then you can access the things like your name as well. So this dot your name, and as I do a save, it gives me Amy. So you can define things in the constructor as well, but usually it's defined in the state as well. State is nothing, just some default values are defined when the things are loaded. So okay, you have learned quite a lot about the constructor in this movie. I know this was a little bit overwhelming for you, but again, rewatch the movie if you wish. But again, this is all about the basics of component, and I believe now is the time that you know quite a lot about the constructor. So let's go ahead, move on, and try to create one very simple project, but this time the project is going to be on the CodePen, and we'll look out what the virtual DOM is and a little bit more things about the React.js.